Good morning. I'll go ahead and get set up here. Good morning. Rasmus is on. Good morning, sir. How's my audio? Got 2 people joining us so far. 3 is on. How's the audio, guys? Four people joining us. Thank you for being on this morning. 6 people so far. 7. Doug is on. Let me know if my audio is okay, as always. Rich says, good morning, Rich. Good morning, sir. Wake up, people. Brew some fresh coffee and join us. Yeah, absolutely. Doug says audio is good. All right. 10 people joining me this morning. 13 so far. Had Emerging Threats Monday, man. Good morning. And if you're sitting at home, grab a cup of coffee, snuggle up under a blanket. We got a pretty dark story to talk about this morning, but I think it's an important one. And I'm going to give you some things to think about on this Monday morning, and as always, good morning and welcome. I am Rich Brown, the co-founder, co-host of the American Warrior Show, co-founder of the American Warrior Society. American Warrior Show is the America's number one self-defense podcast, yeah. If you want to check out the American Warrior Show, please go to AmericanWarriorShow.com. Check out all of our amazing sponsors that make that show possible. If you want to get some American Warrior Society swag, this morning I'm wearing my shooting performance shirt that I wear when I co-instruct with Mr. Mike Seeklander, my partner in crime. And if you want to pick up one of these coffee mugs, they're pretty cool. American Warrior Show, you can do that on our website. Got 21 people joining us so far for Emerging Threats Monday. Alan Kelly is on. Elke is on. Ted is on. Will Parker is on. Jesse Ross, good morning, sir. Gene is on. Bob Bill is on. Wow, a lot of folks on this morning. 26 people so far. Please like and share. I got a very dark show for you this morning. Emerging Threats Monday is always going to be a little tinged with fatalism, because I try to pick the worst threats I can think about to share with you and kind of keep them on your radar. You know, when I prepare for Emerging Threats Monday, I take a look at like what has killed the most people in the 20th century or right now. What are some of the threats that maybe we tend to take our eye off a little bit? I want to make sure to position them in a way that you can understand them and see them for what they are. And today is no different. We've talked about, Emerging Threats Monday. The past few weeks, we talked about the threat to the grid. We talked about when it comes to things that can make our electrical grid go down. We talked about a Carrington type event, which is a solar flare. We talked about electromagnetic pulse. We talked about cyber attack. We talked about the Yellowstone supervolcano. We talked about home fires. And today we're going to talk about genocide, man. I got 35 people joining me. Please like and share, because you're going to want a cup of coffee for this one. It's going to be a little dark this morning, and I apologize. But this is an important topic that we don't need to take our eye off of. I really hadn't done any reading on genocide before until probably about 2004, 2005. I was losing a lot of friends in Iraq, and a friend of mine said, hey man, I don't know why he suggested this, but he's like, you should read Night by Elie Wiesel. Rich, I can see you're in a dark place. Let me help you out. Read Night by Elie Wiesel. And if you haven't read that book, man, I highly encourage you to do it. Phenomenal book. I think Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor, he tells his story of the Holocaust, a very personal account. And I think he won the Nobel Prize for it. If he did, he should have. Before I go on much further and talk to you about what genocide is, thank you to the 38 people that are joining me this morning. Rich said there's a high-pitched whine in the audio. Not too bad. Just thought you should know about it. I appreciate that, Rich. Not sure if anybody else is hearing that or how distracting it may be. Ted, coin number 1641 is on board. Coin number 800, Will Parker. Coin number 1571, Alan. Good morning to the 33 people that are on this morning. Please like and share. Sorry about the audio issue. We'll have to get that sorted out. Genocide. So we talked about a little bit about Elie Wiesel and kind of what was the jumping off point for me to dig in and read more about different genocides. And then I read Viktor Frankl's amazing book, A Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a psychologist during the Holocaust. And then I got into the Rwandan genocide, and we'll talk more in detail about the Rwandan genocide and why I think that is so important as a case study to read about. So check out the AmericanWarriorSociety.com. I mentioned that at the beginning, but AmericanWarriorSociety.com is today's sponsor of Emerging Threats Monday. AmericanWarriorSociety.com, we have hundreds of articles. We have a CIA page there for you to check out. It's the Criminal Intelligence Activity page where you can go in and read about all the crimes and threats to your safety and security, as well as hundreds of articles written by a lot of subject matter experts and everything from edge weapons to digital security and everything in between, shooting. But if you want to get the premium content, you want to find out more about all the training programs we have for less lethal, for combatives, handgun, rifle, shotgun, fitness, medical. It's all inside the training vault. It doesn't cost you anything for the first 14 days. Check it out. Rasmus says good to him. Awesome. John Jock says not hearing any high-pitched tones. That's awesome, man. Thanks for clarifying that for me. And Rich, I'm sorry you're going through that. 47 folks joining us live. Please like and share. I want to tell you a story, man. Genocide has been around forever. And when I was looking for what was probably the earliest case of it, I stumbled upon 1 Samuel 15, verse 1 through 3. And I'm going to read that to you. And Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus say the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel, in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." And again, that's a reading of the word, 1 Samuel 15, verse 1 through 3. So we have God instructing and condoning genocide. And I will remind the listeners out there that are Christian like I am, a lot of these genocides in the 20th century were perpetrated by Christians. And if that may come as a shock to you, it probably shouldn't, because we have to remember the first recorded murder was in Genesis, and it's of Cain killing Abel. We are the sons and daughters of Cain, folks. Abel was killed and didn't get to have any children. We are the descendants of Cain. And we carry his mark, and we're capable of the same atrocities that he did. In the 20th century was the darkest period of genocide. In the 20th century alone, it not only gave us the word, there was no word for genocide until the 20th century. Not only did we get the word, and the definition of obviously that word, but we also lost 200 million people to genocide in the 20th century alone. That's more than all the wars combined. So it's a staggering number, 200 million people killed in genocide in just the 20th century, folks, which is pretty horrific. In the 20th century, there was a Yale law professor named Raphael Lemkin, a survivor of the Holocaust himself, who coined the phrase genocide, and he took the Greek word geno for a race or tribe of people, with cide, the Latin word for the act of killing, and combined them to create genocide. Well, after the Holocaust, the international community, the United Nations said, never again, we're never going to let this happen again. So in 1948, they had a Genocide Convention. And in this Genocide Convention, they said, we're going to put in place systems and processes and procedures to make sure that this never happens again. And they did. And in 1948, they come up with the actual definition that the UN ratified, and it is the definition for genocide is acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such, including the killing of its members, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately imposing living conditions that seek to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, preventing births or forcing the transfer of children out of one group to another. And it's interesting to note when they start talking about what is genocide, the only way that they could get the U.S. to ratify this convention on genocide was to remove part of the language that was in the first draft. See, the first draft said that political opponents, if you wipe out your political opponents, that could be an act of genocide. And the USSR said, Stalin, yeah, I'm not ratifying that, man. You're going to have to pull that piece of language out if you want me to sign this thing. So they did. They caved in to Stalin. Let's see here who's on before I go much further. So the UN Convention on Genocide was ratified. And here we go. We're going to make sure this never happens again. Elke says, if I crank up the volume much louder than normal, then I can hear a faint whine like a computer fan, but not a normal volume. Paul has joined us. Greg is on. Says, good morning, Rich. Paul says, good morning, Rich. Sorry I'm late. Just got home from work. Eddie is on. Roger is on. Please like and share. Elke says, related podcast. The Marty Maid podcast, How to Serve Man Sacrifice. Ted said Seth, then Noah, but we are natural evil. Walt has joined us. Eddie says, hey, Rich. Okay. Good morning, folks. Talking about genocide. Let's talk about a specific case of genocide because we could talk about what happened to the Armenians in 1915 and 1918. We could talk about Cambodia with Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in 1975 and 1979. 2 million people dead there. 1.5 million Armenians slaughtered in the 3 years of the Armenian genocide. We could talk about a lot of them, but I'm probably going to talk about Rwanda in the greatest detail. And then after we talk about Rwanda, we'll look at the 8 stages of genocide. I'm sorry that they added 2 more, the 10 stages of genocide. How these things kind of happen slowly. They don't happen immediately. And matter of fact, if you look at that, there's a really good book called Two Who Survived. It's written by Rose and Max Schindler. And this is a husband and wife couple that survived the Holocaust and then met and married each other. And if you listen to their story or Ellie Wetzel's story, you'll see that, these things happen very slowly. First, it is, well, I don't want to get into it because we're going to talk about it over the 8 stages of genocide. So let's say that toward the end. If you want to understand what happened in Rwanda, you probably have to go back to this guy. This is King Leopold of Belgium. King Leopold is looking at all the other monarchs in Europe and he says, I want a colony in Africa too. I want to go down there and exploit Africa like all the other monarchs in Europe are doing. Find me one that I can get to. So they go into the Congo in Central Africa, and King Leopold finally gets his colony. And one of the things that King Leopold does is he sets about, like, who are going to be my overseers? And there's these 2 races of people in Central Africa, specifically Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis. Now, the Tutsis, they're the cattle farmers, so they have wealth. They own cattle. They got money. They're taller than the Hutus. They got long, slender European noses. So based on this horrible racial stereotyping, he puts the 15% of the population that are Tutsi in charge of the majority, 85%, that are Hutu, and created the seeds for a problem. So starting in the 1800s, the Tutsis oversee this area for the Belgians, and it creates a lot of animosity for the Hutus. So much so that in 1959, the Hutus have had enough, man. They start a violent revolt, and over the course of 3 years, from 1959 until 1962, they overthrow the Belgians and the Tutsis. And when the Belgians pull out, About 360,000 Tutsis also flee the country for Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Congo. And they hide out. These Tutsis are like, hey man. Well, the Hutus are now in power, and the Hutus don't want to give it up. And they do reprisal killings against the Tutsis for years. Matter of fact, they do this until the 1980s, the late 1980s, when the Tutsis that are living in exile, remember I told you 360,000 of them fled. Well, they decided we want to go back to our home. We want to go home. And the only way we're going to get to go back home is if we form a guerrilla force and take our country back. So this thing called the RPF gets started, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And they go in and start a siege of the country. And rather quickly, in 1990, when they first go in, a force of 4,000 goes in to try to take their country back. The leader of the group is killed almost immediately. And his second in command is a gentleman by the name of Paul Kagame. And Paul Kagame wasn't on the ground in Rwanda at that time fighting the Hutu Rwandan military. He was in the United States going to United States Army Command and Staff College, I kid you not. Paul Kagame gets the word that his boss has been killed and he's got to get back to Rwanda to lead the fight. So he arrives and he starts resting and recuperating. He starts recruiting. He's gathering up his forces. And in January 1991, he reattacks. Now here's the thing. When the Tutsi-led guerrillas start coming back into Rwanda and attacking Rwanda, the Hutu extremists that are running the government in Rwanda at the time say, we've been telling you, it's always been a theoretical possibility that these Tutsi cockroaches at some point are going to want to come back. That's what they call them, cockroaches. That they're going to want to come back, and here they are. So we got to do something. So they start planning. Well, eventually, the RPF, led by Paul Kagame, start winning so much against the Rwandan army, the government army, that they decide that we're going to have to sit down and do peace talks with these folks. So at the Arusha Accords, the Rwandan president, a gentleman by the name of Juvenal Habyarimana, he's a Hutu, and he's the leader of the Hutu Rwandan government, but he basically signs a peace agreement with Paul Kagame and the rest of the RPF that says, we'll do power sharing, man. We'll let some Tutsis come into the government. We're gonna take the RPF, these Tutsis there. We're gonna roll them into the Rwandan military, and we're all gonna sing Kumbaya. Well, when the Rwandan president Juvenal Habyarimana signed the Arusha Peace Accords, he basically signed his own death warrant because the Hutu extremists in his own party were never going to allow power sharing with Tutsi cockroaches. Never. Well, when the United Nations saw the Arusha Accords get assigned, they said, man, if we don't send some peacekeepers in there, this place is going to blow up. It's a powder keg. We can see it. So the United Nations starts something called UNAMAR, which was United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda. And they put this guy in charge. He was a Canadian general by the name of Romeo Dallaire, and he wrote an outstanding book called Shaking Hands with the Devil. And if you want to know about Rwanda, I would highly encourage this very thick book. He lays it all out. He points fingers at everybody because he was the guy in charge on the ground. He was a great Canadian military officer. He had never worn the blue beret of the United Nations before, never been to Africa before. But he took command pretty quickly, and one of the things that he learned was in January of 1994, so he arrives in late 1993, January 1994, Romeo Dallaire has some spies that he's cultivating, and they tell him, hey man, they're planning a genocide. Matter of fact, they're planning on the ability to kill 1,000 Tutsis every 20 minutes. So he fires a cable off in January 1994 to the United Nations, and it's labeled Genocide Facts, and he lays out all the facts of what he sees on the ground. United Nations pays it no mind. And before I go any further and tell you what the CIA were doing in Rwanda, let's see who's on. David is on, Tom is on, my cousin Roman, good morning sir, is on. TC Fuller is on, always good to see you. Tammy up there in Ohio, good morning Tammy. TC said, it's my favorite failed child actor. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I'm a failed 1970s child actor. Let's see who can figure out what TV show I used to be on back in the 70s. True story. One season is all they let me on, and I got fired. David is on. Jeffrey Young is on. He is coin number 1614. Good morning. Please like and share. We're talking about the Rwandan genocide, and then we're going to get into the stages of genocide and talk a little bit more in detail about how these things happen. So in January 1994, in August of 1993, the Arusha Accords are signed. Peace sharing between the Hutus and Tutsis. Everybody thinks it's going to be kumbaya. January of 1994 rolls around. Talk of genocide is going on in the streets. February of 1994, the CIA sends a memo off to the U.S. State Department and says, look, we see the seeds of genocide are growing here. We're looking at probably worst case scenario, 500,000 slaughtered. Nobody does anything about it. Now, this was in February 1994. On the night of April the 6th, 1994, the Rwandan presidential plane was flying in. It was a French Falcon jet. It had the Burundi president was on it also. These are both Hutus, by the way, these two presidents. Juvenal Habyarimana was the president of Rwanda. It was his personal plane. And when they came into land at the capital of Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, 2 surface-to-air missiles slammed into the side of that French Falcon jet and sent it to the dirt, killing all on board. Well, immediately this everybody could see, oh my God, they've killed our Hutu president. It's got to be those cockroaches. Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian commanding the UN forces there, he's like, oh my God, who's next in command? Well, the next person to be in charge of Rwanda was Madame Agatha. Madame Agatha was the first Rwandan female prime minister. So Romeo Dallaire gets some UN troops together and he sends them over to guard her. And he sends 10 Belgian troops and 5 Ghanaian troops. And the 5 Ghanaian troops are positioned outside the gate. The 10 Belgians rush inside the house, and they are augmented there by the presidential guard. And you think everything's going to be okay. And the plan is to get her on the radio station first thing, April the 7th, 1994. Let her get on the Hutu hate radio and let everybody know, hey, we're going to be okay. I'm still a Hutu. We're still in power. Everybody calm down. But she never made it to the radio station. Because that morning about 9 a.m., in rolls the Rwandan military. And they disarm the Belgian peacekeepers. They take their weapons away. They take the weapons away, the Ghanaians, and they free them. They take the 10 Belgians, hack them up with machetes, and then murder them. They pull Madame Agatha out and her husband out and shoot her in the head. And leave the Prime Minister naked in her front yard with a beer bottle, naked with a beer bottle in her. Horrible. After that, there was nobody and nothing to put the brakes on. The government now was completely controlled by Hutu extremists. They had wiped out the moderate president. The Hutu extremists inside the government had wiped out Madame Agatha, another moderate Hutu. And over the course of the next 100 days was the fastest genocide in human history. Almost 1 million Rwandans were slaughtered by their government in 100 days. Almost 1 million people. I mean, it's a staggering amount. And again, there was no gas furnaces. The killing was done primarily by a group called the Interahamwe with machetes. Dirty, cheap Chinese machetes like this one was what the Interahamwe was armed with when they went about hacking their neighbors. Please like and share. It gets darker. The Interahamwe was somebody that got brought in when the Tutsi-backed RPF started attacking the country. And it was, we need more people to bolster our Rwandan military, so they started training the Interahamwe. But bullets cost money, guns cost money. They didn't have these things to arm the Interahamwe with. They only had things like this. So this is what they gave them. Now, the Rwandan massacre, it's easy to You could pick out a lot of horrific things that happened during the Rwandan massacre, but I'm going to give you one example because it shows a lot of things here, and that's the Murumba Technical School massacre. The French were also in Rwanda at the time doing what they called Operation Turquoise. And I don't know much about it, and I'm still kind of digging into it. It's something that the French really don't want to talk much about for obvious reasons. Because the French were back in the Rwandan government who did the genocide. The French were protecting the Murumba Technical School. And this is over in the southwest part of Rwanda. So when the killings started in earnest on April the 7th, 1994, around April the 16th, word is getting out and the Tutsis are fearful. And about 65,000 Tutsis showed up at a church. And the bishop and the town mayor said, look, we can't take care of all you here. We need you 65,000 to go down the road to the Murumba Technical School, and there you will find sanctuary because the French are there. And the French can take care of you. We can't. So when they get down to the Murumba Technical School, and it looks like my feed is frozen, let me know if you guys are still there. But when they get down to the Murumba Technical School, it was a trap. They cut off the water to the technical school, they cut off the power to the technical school, and the French forces that were there to protect them left. Now the Interahamwe show up with their machetes, and the Rwandan military showed up with the machetes, and they surrounded the Murumba Technical School, and it's 65,000 people inside of it. And they begin to wait. They waited till the water and the electricity and the lack of food started making these people ill and weak, and they decided to attack. And on the morning of April the 21st, the Interahamwe began to attack the school. And the 65,000 people that were holed up inside this, think of like a community college. Now the Tutsis didn't go quietly. They picked up stones, they pulled bricks out of the mortar in the building to fight with. And they fought back their own government and their own army and their own militia that were there to slaughter them. But it was of little use. They threw grenades into the school, they shot into the school, and then they attacked with machetes into the school and killed everybody but 13 people were all I'm aware of that escaped. And today the Murumba Technical School stands as a memorial site to the massacre. Please like and share. Another excellent book if you're interested in the Rwandan genocide. I can't recommend this enough. We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. And it's a haunting book about the genocide. There's a lot of little personal stories in this book, whereas Romeo Dallaire tells what the leadership knew and didn't know and what they were doing and not doing. This is more of a personal account where you get to know what the people were doing. You've probably seen the movie Hotel Rwanda at some point. If you haven't, you need to watch it. And it's Paul Rusesabagina is the manager of the Hotel Michelin. And you see how what he does to save a lot of lives during the Rwandan genocide. Another really good movie, if you haven't watched it, is Sometimes in April. Another really good Rwandan genocide movie. But this is something that you can't think, well, Rich, this is an African problem, man. This is what people do in Africa, bro. And I disagree with it. I disagree with you because look at what happened in Sarajevo. Sarajevo was a winter wonderland, man. We had the Winter Olympics there. It was a beautiful place. A couple years later, we have genocide going on there. So this is not a Africa thing. This is a people thing. Let's talk about the 8 stages, guys. And I appreciate you for being on with me this morning. It looks like I'm having some technical difficulties on my laptop, so I can't really see what your comments are. But please like and share. We're going to talk about George Stanton next. And George Stanton was a first-year Yale Law student when he gets hired by the Church World Service to be their first field director in Cambodia. And George Stanton feels like the Lord is calling him to go to Cambodia to find out what happened there under Pol Pot in 1975 to 1979, the 2 million people killed in the killing fields. And he gets there and he says, man, never again. what he saw there haunted him forever, and he came back to the United States and finished law school and ended up becoming a law professor at Yale. And while he was there, he wrote The 8 Stages of Genocide, where he actually saw that there was a roadmap leading to genocide. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. If you can, a society that gets on the road to genocide can actually get off at some point, and we'll talk about it here in a second. So, the Rwanda genocide happens in 1994, and it only ends at the end of 100 days when the RPF, the Tutsi-backed guerrillas, take over the country and take over the government. Only then did it end. And it's interesting, you know, one of the deputy secretaries, a woman by the name of Bushnell, she's calling the Rwandan military and the Rwandan government saying, you guys got to stop this thing. She's calling Paul Kagame, going, look, I know you're the rebel leader. You guys got to stop. And Paul Kagame's comment to her was, Madam, they're killing my people. And he would not stop. Thank God. He's now currently the Rwandan president. Back to George Stanton. So George Stanton gets brought in 1996 to give a lecture to the State Department about the 8 stages of genocide, and he would actually go on to create 2 more stages. To currently, it's the 10 stages of genocide, and we're going to talk about them very briefly. Walt says, back to work, break over. I appreciate you being on this morning, Walt. All right, let's talk about the 10 stages of genocide, because I think you're going to see some of the things of what we know about the Holocaust and some of these other genocides play into the case here. The first stage is classification. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a society choosing to classify its members. We do it all the time. We classified our members, men and women, young and old, male and female, white and black and Asian, and all these classifications, tall and short, handicapped and able-bodied. Its only classification is only a problem when it develops into an us versus them, and then it becomes a problem. The second stage is symbolization. Now, this is an easy one to think of because we saw the Nazis do it. The Jews had to wear the gold star. It's an outward symbol of hate forced upon one group, and that's part of it. It's not necessarily if one group decides, we're going to wear these, we'd like to identify. That can be problematic. But it's more of a problem as far as a step of genocide when I'm forcing you. The government says you will wear that Star of David, or you will wear that upside down pink triangle that signifies homosexuals. The third thing is discrimination, the third step of genocide. And this is where the law begins to discriminate against one of its people. Think of segregation. Think of the Jim Crow laws. Think of apartheid in South Africa. This is a step on the road to genocide. And that's why people find it so abhorrent when these kind of things happen. The next thing after discrimination, the fourth thing is dehumanization. And this is a really dangerous one. This is where you had the Nazis saying that the Jews were vermin. The Hutu-backed majority of the Rwandan government saying that Tutsis are cockroaches. And there's some, the hate radio that they spewed over there. They hunted down the people that were running those radio stations in Rwanda that were leading the genocide, man. Put them in criminal tribunals after the fact, and a lot of them received a death sentence, and they should, because the hate that they were spewing on those radio stations. One of the things I heard was, a cockroach can never give birth to a butterfly. A cockroach can only give birth to other cockroaches, which again meant go kill the Tutsi women. So dehumanization, because you kill a person, but you exterminate a pest. The fifth thing is genocide. The step of genocide is organization. Genocides are always organized. Think of the Interhamwe. You know, they realize that the army can only do so much, so we need this militia. And then they gave the Interahamwe the list of where all the Tutsis lived, gave them some machetes and a go and execute command, and they went. The Nazi SS guards. Polarization is step number 6 on the road to genocide. And this is where the hate groups are broadcasting their propaganda to further polarize the country. And I would say, do we have media in the country today that are polarizing Americans? I would submit we do. And you have to be cognizant of that you're being polarized, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Step number 7, preparation. And this is a dangerous one. The minute that you see that mass killings are being planned and victims being identified and people are being separated out, you got to act. And one of the things that Gregory Stanton says that you need to do in order to combat this is, at this stage, a genocide emergency must be declared to do something about it, because if left unchecked, it's gone forward. Because if you look at, these are governments that do genocides, not your average people. These are the governments are sanctioning and condoning it. Persecution is step number 8. And this is forced displacement, ghettos, concentration camps, Japanese internment camps, let us not forget. We've seen it here in America, folks. Matter of fact, if you go back through the steps of genocide up to persecution, you will see that virtually all of these things were done to the Japanese during World War II. From a period of 1942 until 1945, hundreds of thousands of American-born American citizens of Japanese descent were rounded up and put in internment camps against their will. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. Number 9, extermination. Extermination. And the reason that Gregory Stanton doesn't call it killing, because that's not what the killers think they're doing. They don't think they're killing human beings, or else they probably couldn't stomach it. What they're doing is exterminating the people that they've already dehumanized. They don't believe their victims are fully human. That was step 4, dehumanization. Now we've gotten, and again, these things, it's not one step and then the next step. A lot of these run parallel to each other. They're happening at the same time. So extermination. And finally, step 10, perhaps one of the most cruel steps, is denial. Denial that it never happened. Don't know what you're talking about. It didn't happen here. I didn't do it. Well, if I did, I was ordered to do it. Really, it wasn't me. It was the guy that told me to do it. A lot of Hutu men killed their Tutsi wives. I said, well, I had to do it. I had no choice. So denial is the final step that a genocide ever took place. And that's bad. So we went through the 10 stages of genocide. We talked a little bit about the Rwandan genocide. Thank you to the 49 folks that are on here this morning. Native Americans as well. Yeah, we're going to talk about that briefly. Thank you to the 50 folks that are joining me here this morning. We're going to wrap it up real quick. When you look at the 10 stages of genocide as it pertains to something like the Holocaust, it's easy to see because we have the evidence. We know that the Holocaust occurred. We know the genocide in Rwanda occurred, and we can sift through the rubble and look at what happened. But I would also submit that, like you guys are saying, the Indian Removal Act of 1838, signed by President Andrew Jackson. One of my great uncles, if you will, was a guy named Chief Joe Vann. I have Vans in my family, but my Vans were from, anyway, doesn't matter. Chief Joe Vann lived just outside of Chatsworth, Georgia. He had a mansion down there built in 1803. Beautiful place. You can still see it today. But Chief Joe Vann, he was half European descent, half Cherokee, spoke English really well. He could have passed probably for a white guy if he wanted to. But he then made the mistake of hiring a white man, and the United States government said an Indian could never hire a white man, and that's exactly what they needed, to seize all of Chief Joe Vann's lands, to seize his beautiful mansion, to take all of his money away from him and march him off on the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans perished as part of the persecution of the United States government. So all those steps are present. Maybe not the systematic extermination, but I would submit that there were acts of genocide, like a Wounded Knee, etc., during our war against the Native Americans, if you want to call it that. We also have to look at Japanese internment. Japanese internment, man, is really a dark chapter that we don't like to look at, but it really did happen. Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, where he laid out that we need to have these military districts. I'm going to turn over I'm going to give authority to the United States Army to do what it wants to do to keep our country safe. And one of the things that had to be done, or so they thought, was round up these Japanese Americans, and I'm going to say that again, Americans of Japanese descent, and put them in internment camps. And like they said, this is for your own safety. And there was many Japanese said, well, if this is for my safety, why are the machine guns pointing in at me and not pointing out to protect me? This one guy, Korematsu, he says, I'm not going. I'm not going to the internment camps. My family, his family went to the internment camps. I'm not going. I'm going to hang out here in Oakland, California with my Italian girlfriend, and I'm just going to roll the dice. Well, what happens? Somebody sees a Japanese dude walking down the streets of Oakland. They call the police, and the Oakland police arrest him for being of Asian descent, because it was a felony at Oakland to be of Japanese descent and walking and seen on the streets. So Korematsu gets arrested, charged with a felony, and Korematsu pleads his case all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the fall of 1944, the Supreme Court renders its decision. Had Korematsu, an American citizen, born in America, never been to Japan, been denied his 5th and 14th Amendment rights. And the Supreme Court said, in a 6-3 split, that Korematsu's rights had not been infringed because the president had wartime powers to segregate people by race if he chose to do so. And Justice Murphy, and one of the 3 dissenters to this decision, said, I'm afraid that what we're doing here is we're loading and cocking a gun and laying it for a future president to pick up someday, and in the interest of national emergency, segregate people by race and do whatever he wants to do. And the Korematsu decision still stands. It is still on the books. It has not been overturned. Are we in the midst? And I would close with this, folks. When you say, Rich, this genocide thing, man, can't happen here. Are we in the midst of a national emergency right now? We are. Have we been given stay-at-home orders? We have. Does the Korematsu decision still stand to segregate people in the United States based on race at a time of national emergency? It does. So again, don't think it can't happen here. Don't think it's an Africa problem. Don't think it's a Bosnia problem or a Cambodia problem or a Germany problem. It's a human being problem. Chile probably had a genocide here in our hemisphere. So these things can and do happen. It's probably the darkest thing that I can think of that human beings do to each other. But it can and does happen. And thank you to the 63 people that are joining me today. I'm wrapping up, man. I really appreciate you joining me here on Emerging Threats Monday. If you have any questions, throw them in here and we'll see if we can answer them. And otherwise, I'm going to let you get on with your day. This is just something to consider. I want you to know that there are stages of genocide. They don't happen overnight. You can walk down this road and choose to get off of it anytime you want. But it starts with an us versus them. It starts with, it ends up in dehumanization. It leads to persecution, legal discrimination of one group or another. We have to guard against that, man. And again, a lot of the bishops are hunted down for war criminals because of what they did in Rwanda, that they allowed to happen to their flock. Anyway, 59 folks on. Anybody got any questions for me? Jason says, great show, a lot of great information. Les says, I should have listened more in school to a lot of this, had forgotten or worse, never learned. TC said, thanks, Rich. Guys, thank you for joining me this morning. I know it's been a dark little history lesson, if you will, this morning, but it's something to think about, man, because don't think it can't happen here. It can happen anywhere that people are. Ted says, thank you so much. Jody says, tag someone. Love says, thank you, Rich. What was the book you held up? Held up a few different books. These are specifically about the Rwandan genocide. We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. That's an actual quote of someone that was murdered in the genocide. We talked about Romeo Dallaire's excellent book, Shake Hands with the Devil. He was the Unimar commander in Rwanda, and he points fingers, man. He's like, I told the UN this was happening. And Belgians pulled out and left these Rwandans to die. And then the seeds were sown when King Leopold, this excellent book, King Leopold's Ghost, when King Leopold went into the central parts of Africa and created the divisions that would ultimately lead to genocide. There's also Night by Elie Wiesel if you're interested in the Holocaust. There's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. There's Two That Survived by the Schindlers, Rose and Max. I think it's important to read these things and see the slippery slope that is out there for how people can lead to this. But anyway, I hope that answers your question, love. Doug says, thank you, stay safe and healthy. TC says, best podcast by a Romper Room alumnus ever. Yes, if you're a child of the 70s, you ever watch Romper Room, there's a good chance you may have watched your old pal, Rich Brown, on Romper Room. I was only there for a season before they fired me, but what a season it was. Terry says, very informative, thanks. Thank you to the 50 folks that have joined me this morning on Emerging Threats Monday. Join me Friday morning for another Coffee with Rich. Next Monday, we'll have another Emerging Threats Monday, and we'll talk about another threat to humanity or to you individually, and maybe some of the things that you can do to prepare for it. Stay safe, and remember, the fight is coming. Be ready.